So, as somebody who's been carrying a firearm for over 13 years daily, one of the biggest inconveniences is when you come home, you need to take your firearm off of yourself and put it somewhere safe, somewhere secure, especially if you have kids. Now, I know most of us are responsible, we have a gun safe somewhere, but let's be honest, usually these gun safes are big, they're bulky, they're kind of out of the way because they're a bit of an eyesore. Your wife doesn't want them where everybody can see them, so sometimes they're in your closet behind some clothes, sometimes they're in the garage, sometimes they're in the mudroom. And let's be honest, taking your firearm out and walking to those locations to secure it is a pain in the butt. But you have to be a responsible firearm owner, especially if you have kids in the house. That's why you need to get yourself a Stopbox Pro portable gun safe. You can make it non-portable. You can drill some holes in it and mount it to a place of convenience in your house, but it requires no batteries and no electricity. You simply come in your house, walk up to your safe, choose your finger button combinations, open a safe, remove your firearm from your person, put it in the safe. If you close your safe, just that easy, it's secure. So do yourself a favor, head over to stopboxusa.com/D410 and get all the information today on your Stopbox Pro. When seconds count, trust the only non-fail firearm storage box, Stopbox Pro, at stopboxusa.com/D410.
Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite podcast. This is Jeff Copsetta. I'm standing in for Don Abernathy tonight, and I'm joined, as always, by my wingman, Dennis Blocker. Dennis, how you doing tonight?
Doing excellent. Super stoked about our guests tonight.
Oh, man, that's an understatement. And also our trusty sidekick. No, not Rosie the Riveter. It's Zach the producer. He's a little prettier than Rosie. Zach, how you doing?
Doing very good. Very good. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Well, we're going to get right into this thing. We're going to let Zach introduce our very special guest tonight, because without Zach, we probably wouldn't have him. So, Zach, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Folks, we have another one for the record books tonight. He is the best-selling author of 27 books, including Race of Aces, one of my favorites, Indestructible, and his brand new book, 53 Days on Starvation Island, the story of the Marine airmen and pilots who saved Guadalcanal. It is, in my opinion, the best book that has ever been written on the Battle of Guadalcanal, and it's definitely in my top 5 favorite World War II books of all time. For his reporting in Afghanistan, the Department of Defense presented him with the Thomas Jefferson Award in 2010, and for his work with the Oregon National Guard, he was inducted into the 162nd Infantry Regiment as an honorary member in 2011. Joining us tonight from Oregon is our very special guest, author John Bruning. Thank you, John, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Jack. It's a real honor to be here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we have so many questions that we want to get to tonight, John. But first, for those in the audience that may not be experts on the Battle of Guadalcanal or the Pacific War, why don't you give us a little background, and then why don't you talk about the 3 Marines that this story focuses on? And I see you also have a friend joining us, too.
Yeah, okay. Sylvia is my writing cat. Anybody who follows me on social media sees a lot of her. She is definitely going to be a presence tonight. I apologize. It's either this or she'll sit at the hangar door screaming, and we can't have that. But I do have treats that can keep her at bay. The story of Guadalcanal is the story of a hastily thrown together offensive born out of desperation. So keep in mind that this is the summer of 1942. The Japanese are still ascended in the Pacific, even though they have suffered a major setback at Guadalcanal. I mean, at Midway in June of 1942. They were still offensively inclined and still had the strategic initiative, and they were working their way towards trying to cut off the supply lines and the sea lanes between the U.S. and Australia by moving down the Solomon Islands into the New Hebrides and establishing a chain of air bases where long-range bombers could strike at the supply convoys going to Australia. That was such a threat that the Pentagon and the president decided, the War Department at the time, decided that it had to be countered and stopped. Otherwise, our very position in the Pacific could have been compromised because Australia was going to be essentially a giant supply base for our future advances in the Southwest Pacific theater and into ultimately the Philippines. So the idea was to recapture the island of Guadalcanal at the southern end of the Solomon Islands, where the Japanese were building a long range bomber base. The airfield was not yet complete, but it was being hastily worked on. And the speed at which they were actually able to cut this strip out of the jungle prompted the Americans to push the invasion date up. So everything was very hastily thrown together. We had the First Marine Division was in the area in theater, but they hadn't seen any combat. So they would be the primary instrument to actually retake this island until more reinforcements could get in, U.S. Army units mainly. The whole thing was done on a shoestring. We didn't really know how to plan an offensive. It was our first of World War II, and they made many, many, many errors. One of my guys later, Dick Mangrum, the VMSB 232 skipper, once quipped that the air plan for the invasion was an afterthought. And that was really, really true. The idea was to get the Marines on the island to finish the base. Once the airfield was complete, they would get a couple of squadrons of Marine aircraft up to protect the perimeter around the airfield. And bottom line, they didn't really plan that very well, and it turned into a complete and total cluster from the get-go. And the story that I have written about is the story of the guys who essentially made a success out of that cluster. And it was very, very difficult. You can tell through the course of the book that these guys really suffered, and they suffered for years afterwards. Try to make that point towards the end of the book. But this was our first offensive of World War II, and ultimately what happened at the beginning of it was the Marines were able to land and successfully take the airfield and start to get it into commission. And yet the Navy suffered a serious naval defeat at a battle called Savo Island, where 4 cruisers were sunk, which prompted the Navy to withdraw from the area for several weeks. And that left the Marines out on a limb with barely any supplies, only a couple of units of ammunition. They were living off of captured Japanese rice. And it was into that situation where the Japanese had air superiority and naval superiority around the island that the 2 squadrons I wrote about in 53 days joined the fight.
So
Now, you said something interesting there, John. Units of fire, just a few units of fire. Now, our audience may not be familiar with that form of measurement, and if you could fill us in, because I think it's important when you think about a unit of fire and how long they had to make it last.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head how many days worth it was, but a unit of fire was 1 day's worth of full ammunition loadout for the 1st Marine Division. And I think they only had 3 or 4 units of fire initially. And all the while, the Japanese were running supplies and troop reinforcements down to the island to, obviously try to seize the airfield again. The Marines had to build this perimeter around the airfield with a division of troops. They just had, there were gaps. There were gaps because the regiments were spread so thin. And that plays into the climax of this book for sure with the Battle of Edson's Ridge, which we can get into later. Yeah, but basically, had the Japanese been able to put a solid brigade or division down as a response to the initial invasion, which was August 7th, 1942. Within a couple of weeks, the Marines wouldn't have had the ammunition to hold.
Wow. So, John, you briefly touched on the three Marines that this story focuses on. They're John L. Smith from VMF 223, Marion Carl, another pilot from VMF 23, and then Dick Mangrum from, you mentioned, VMSB 232. Believe they were also known as the Red Devils. So these were
Yep.
some incredible pilots and just an incredible story once they got on the island. The question I have for you is how do you do it, John? How do you get such detailed and amazing information about these guys for your books? I mean, these are inner thoughts, conversations, songs around a fire that they're recalling memories. Like, how do you do this? How did you get these?
I was very blessed to have met Marion Carl. He was the first World War II veteran I ever interviewed when I was in graduate school. I was at the University of Oregon for grad school. I was studying military history, which U of O is not a good place to do that, but I was. And he lived in Roseburg, just south of Eugene. And I went down. First year grad student with a mullet. I wrote about this in the book, actually, at the end. And I drove the car that's sitting behind me right now down to meet him. So I rolled up in a 1956 Ford Victoria, two-door hardtop, and sat down in General Carl's living room and spent an afternoon talking with him. And the details that he provided were the basis for much of this book, to be honest. It was something that was in the back of my mind from the day I left his house to write this story somehow. And I was finally able to make it happen during COVID. I was very blessed. Um, Beyond the actual first person oral history interviews, I also interviewed Dennis Bird, who was Dick Mangrum's gunner, and he and I corresponded for years. Uh, there were letters that I had, diary entries, logbooks, newspaper articles, magazine articles that some of the guys wrote when they came back, who subsequently died in training accidents or in combat on subsequent deployments. So that was amazing. And then talking with the families as well. Some of the family members provided incredible resources to me. And then there were many, many other sources, including my research assistant and dear friend Larry. He and I, along with Bruce Carl, who is Mary Carl's son, spent a weekend together at General Carl's house. And Larry had spent years and years talking with guys from 223 and 221 from Midway, and he was able to share with me some just amazing insight. So it was an incredible collaboration, and Larry Lassise is a fantastic historian in his own right. So I don't think I could have finished the book in the way it is without his help. In fact, I know it. So yeah, the sources were many and varied. I was also, the funny thing is, the records for VMF 223, especially, and MAG 23 are just a shambles, and there's multiple iterations of them. It's like in the moment there was one, then when they got back, Colonel Fike redid them and expanded on them, I think. And then there was another one that was amended later by the VMF 223 association. And I was very lucky to have a family friend who was in 223 in a subsequent deployment later in the war on Okinawa. And he was able to provide that annotated one to me, which gave me some of the just most amazing little vignettes and stories about the men, especially how they ended up getting home. That all came out of that iteration of the documentation.
Yeah, I know we said we weren't going to do spoilers. I mean, I know that most people know that Guadalcanal, what happened there, but eventually happened there. But I got to say that I didn't have the time to read the book. So what I did was I got the audio version. And when I'm working in the ranch that I work at after my other job, I'm chainsawing trees. And I really wish there was a time capsule that I could have jumped into and gone back and punched the guy in the face that disrespected those ground crews that were getting home after everything they had endured and the things that they had made happen out of sheer gut and tenacity and love for the pilots. And the officers even stayed back to make sure, like, okay, everything's in order, everything's in line, the guys are squared away. And then this idiot and the ramps, I was like, man, with a chainsaw in my hand is probably not a good thing. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I want to just like, I just
Yes.
skipped way ahead, and I apologize for that. But and if I'll just say this, and then I'll let you continue on what you were saying. I'm so sorry for interrupting, but it just jogs
No.
memory. But I mean, there were several moments I shed tears during this book. And for us guys with our backgrounds, for everything that we've seen in emergency medicine and combat, for us to do that, it's this book is going to touch a lot of people's hearts. It's really, and you did good on these guys. I mean, I when I stepped away from it, I thought I looked over and I saw cars driving down the road, and I thought, what a shame it is that they don't know these guys' names. You know, like how much we all owe, how much my grandfather, who went to Pearl in '44 and stepped aboard the LCI 449 gunboat, like how fortunate he was that these guys had come before and made it possible that he could even go to Pearl and step aboard in peace and not have to worry about being shot out of it's powerful. And you did good. You did really good for these men.
Thank you. That means the world to me. I mean, honestly, I was late on the book, and I didn't want to compromise and cut it short and meet a deadline that was important to my career. What was important to me was these men and their families get the recognition they deserve, because I mean, most of these kids like Scotty McClellan, nobody's ever heard of him. He's still MIA. I That's a spoiler, sorry. Um, what blew me away about the men who compose these two units is they came from every socioeconomic background. There were Ivy Leaguers, there were dirt farmers from Florida, there were people whose dads worked in the trades. And then you had guys like Scotty, who he grew up with nine servants in his house outside of Chicago, and his family rubbed elbows with some of the most politically powerful people in the country. And yet, for all their differences in their backgrounds, when they were thrown into the Marine Corps, they shared a love of aviation that was the great initial bond for them. And then, obviously the fact that they were all Marines was also a factor, but they did not have time to bond like a normal unit because they were thrown together so quickly in July of '42. Most of them had come straight out of the training pipeline, didn't have carrier qualifications. They didn't have any of the basic combat training that Marines and U.S. naval aviators, U.S. Navy pilots would undergo before they first saw the enemy later. There wasn't time for that. They were the stopgap. And in fact, the morning they were about to fly to Guadalcanal, their senior officer present, Colonel Fike, told them, your job is to absorb firepower and buy time for the real units that are going to be coming in. So they were essentially expected to die. And they were told as much. because they didn't have the experience. They didn't have uh, the knowledge base needed to fly a combat aircraft against the most experienced veteran combat aviators in the world at that time, which, were the guys flying out of Rabaul for the Japanese. I mean, some of those guys were aces in 1937, 38. They'd been flying combat for 5 years. And I mean, my gosh, the first time some of them got into battle, the Americans that they were to face at Guadalcanal that are in this book were still freshmen in high school. So the odds were long. And the fact that they not only were able to hold the line until other units got in, but they were able to do so much damage is not only a testament to them, but it's a testament to their immediate leaders like John L. Smith and Dick Mangrum. And I really wanted to do right by them and by this story. So thank you so much for what you just said. That means a lot.
Absolutely, Dennis, and we all completely agree with you. And John, what you were just saying too is a perfect segue into what I wanted to touch on, because your book goes beyond Guadalcanal. It goes beyond Marine aviators. What I took from it was this is the story of the human experience in combat. This is the story of the Spartans at Thermopylae. This is the story of the 7th Cav in Montana. This is the story of every experience in combat rolled into 53 days on some island nobody cared about in 1942. That's really what I took away from it. My baptism of fire was Baghdad in 2004, and I saw so many guys that I served with in these squadrons. And I've read so many books on the Second World War, so many books on combat in general. And that's what this book is. You don't have to know anything about the Pacific War. You don't have to know anything about World War II
Yeah.
to take away what you gave to us on a piece of paper, that you created a legacy, not just for these three amazing individuals, but for an entire generation of Americans. If there's one story, in my opinion, that people need to know, it's this one, because it's so much bigger than themselves. And to know how young they were, right? We know these were pimply faced kids that barely got a chance to kiss their girlfriend on the farm before they went off and rid the world of tyranny. It's not like the movies. We all know that, right? And what's something you mentioned in the book too, which I thought was just pristine, was the bell curve of guys' experiences. The way you described the bell curve of they're brand new. And let's face it, it's not like they're brand new, but it's not like they're getting into a far superior aircraft either, right? It's not like they've got that advantage working. So they're facing not just experienced Japanese pilots, but experienced Japanese pilots with better weapons and better aircraft. So they're behind the eight ball multiple times here. But that bell curve, that analogy to me, I thought was just spot on. And listen, I don't actually have an intelligent question to ask you here. It's more comment based, but thank you.
Yeah.
Because we needed this. We needed this.
Yeah. If I could say
Jeff.
one more thing, John, right before you were, I have to add to all of this, because it's to Dennis's, to Jeff's, to the thank you, to the theme of all of that. What you did, John, with this book, you didn't just put names on a page and put facts on a page, because I've read Thomas Miller's The Cactus Air Force. This is not The Cactus Air Force. I thought your book was what I was going to get when I read Cactus Air Force. It's not that. That's mostly facts. It's still a great book, but what you did, John, is you took men, and by the end of the book, they're not just names anymore. Like you said, they're Scotty, they're Brownie, they're Baldy, they're Zed. You feel like you were best friends with them. So it's in the theme of what these two gentlemen just said. Thank you. Thank you for humanizing this experience and explaining combat in a way that normal readers can understand.
Wow, guys, you're gonna bring me to tears. Thank you. This is This is my life purpose. And it's Jeff. I wrote a book in '06 called The Devil's Sandbox about an Oregon National Guard unit that was in Baghdad in '04, '05 during OIF2. And I was I didn't learn of the story until most of the guys were starting to come home. So I wasn't out there in Iraq with them, but I was with them in Katrina, and I lived with them on the grounds of the New Orleans Baptist Seminary and got to know them. Had many, many long nights talking with them and going on patrols with them. I realized a couple things. First, if I was going to keep writing about combat, I needed to go experience it. But also, I had a mentor early in my career who told me, you've got to see these war stories as male adventure novels. And that's kind of how I approached the craft for years until that book. And then when I went to combat in Afghanistan and saw what was going on, and that there is that probably truly unreachable goal of having a band of brothers. What I saw was you had really close-knit cliques within a unit, and then there was a lot of tension and interpersonal issues. So it was, it's flawed. And I guess when you look back in 50, 60 years, like they did with the unit from the 101st that story's about, you forget some of that. And so I wanted to remember it. And when I came back, I wrote about some of the dichotomies that I saw in combat through the story that Sean Parnell and I wrote with Outlaw Platoon. And, flash forward to when I'm able to actually write 53 days, these kids, they were totally psychologically unprepared for what they were dealing with. It wasn't just a matter of no combat training and minimal training in type. I mean, before they joined the squadrons in July and they were on the boat to get to Guadalcanal starting August 3rd, I think is when they departed Pearl. So literally they only had a few weeks of training time to get to know each other and to learn the aircraft that they would be flying. But they also were not psychologically prepared for what combat was going to require of them. And almost all of them measured up. That is just a testament to them. I mean, a couple of them didn't. But the vast majority, 98% did. And they weren't just fighting in the air. That's the thing that made this 53 days such a crucible of hell. They were on the ground. They were sleeping in an area that was periodically under artillery fire, periodically bombarded by naval gunfire from warships offshore, bombed from the air at night by Washing Machine Charlie. They were sniped. One of the fighter pilots was actually shot in the rear end while he was washing in a nearby river and became a ground casualty as a result. They were literally in a war zone 24/7. And when we culminate the book at Edson's Ridge, there was actually a small force of Japanese that got into the perimeter and made it to the aircraft that these guys were flying. And there's a moment in the book where one of the naval aviators who was attached to VMSB 232, Hal Buell, goes to his SPD Dauntless, and there's a smear of blood on the side of it, and a Marine sitting in the cockpit with a Tommy gun. And he'd actually killed a Japanese soldier who'd come up onto the aircraft to try to destroy it. So that's the nature of what they were dealing with in terms of combat. And then when you layer in the living conditions, the fact that they didn't, for over a week and a half, they didn't even have tents. They were just living there in the jungle. They didn't have mess kits. They didn't have proper food. They were living off of Japanese rice and captured Japanese food stocks. They didn't have any kind of effectively enclosed spaces like, undamaged hangars to work on the aircraft. They didn't even have engine stands. When VMSB 232 first landed, they had one guy who was an armorer who came along as a gunner. They didn't have any bomb carts. So, here they are expected to go sink warships with 1,000-pound bombs that had been left by a transient U.S. Navy unit that had stopped to refuel at Guadalcanal. These bombs had to be hand carried to the aircraft and then lifted up onto the SBD's bomb shackles by hand. And they had to do that day after day, week after week. And even when the ship arrived that had that stuff, it ran aground repeatedly through mismanagement. The captain was an idiot. And they had to pitch most of that stuff overboard. So even what did arrive in early September was not nearly enough to outfit both squadrons, plus the other ones that were coming in piecemeal to try to backfill them. So, I mean, this was just a crazy set of outlier circumstances. And these guys, the thing that just blew me away as I got to know them writing this book is that they measured up. They measured up. They were the measure of the moment. And over again, you see the consequences of that in their later lives. And that is the real cost of what happened during those 53 days. Those 53 days transformed the lives of every person who survived. They all went on, some of them did great things, some of them struggled, but none of them emerged from that unscathed. And that's why I started the book in Washington, D.C. after the deployment. I wanted to show, there is a dark side here that comes back with you. And these guys at the start of the book, Marion and Dick and John L., they're sitting in a hotel, a very posh restaurant in Washington, D.C. near the Navy Department. And they're surrounded by all of these officers with pristine uniforms. And they're literally 10 days removed from wearing rags and, being constantly stricken with the bends from dysentery. And, there's china and nice, flatware and, cloth napkins. I mean, it was just culture shock coming back to that and seeing the country just really not yet even in a mode to understand what it was going to cost and take to win this war. And I mean, this is long before the blizzard of Western Union telegrams started, papering every neighborhood and town in America. And so we as a nation hadn't really risen to the occasion yet. It was all seemingly just a grand adventure that you saw in the newspapers, and periodically somebody lost their lives in your area. But these were the guys who were the first back, and they're the ones who were the first to suffer that disconnect between the society that they protected and defended and fought for, and the civilians and the military officers and personnel who were still stateside and had not yet seen combat.
Yeah, it just reinforces something that, I've said this so much now. I didn't serve with the Oregon National Guard and OIF too, but it was Washington and Arkansas. Washington was first of the 161, I think, and
Oh, you were with the 39th Brigade.
probably I was third brigade first
Arkansas.
Cav, but yeah,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Washington was attached, and first of the 153rd from Arkansas was attached for OIF two, and I've said this 1,000 times. The hardest part about going over there is coming home, and your book hammered that home so well. And there's something else I want to touch on too, and something I want to share with you. Because when Zach first introduced us to your book, he said, "Guys, this is a must read. It's a top 5." And I'm thinking Guadalcanal is what started it for me. I grew up just around the corner. I grew up in rural South Jersey, My dad retired from police department there. We moved to Central Texas here in the 90s and spent the rest of my life here. But walking to school, I would pass the house of a Marine. That's all we knew. I was a Marine in World War II, and he ended up being part of the First Raider Battalion that served at Guadalcanal. So, of course, he was impressed that this 13, 14-year-old kid had heard of Guadalcanal. So we really got close. And unfortunately, I was too young to really honestly comprehend half of what he was telling me at that age. And I was also too young to think to actually record any of our conversations. But Guadalcanal is what really, that's the genesis of my interest in World War II. The first book I read was Guadalcanal Diary. So, and I'm more of an Eighth Air Force, fanatic myself. But the Pacific still warms my heart. I spent 5 years working for National Museum of the Pacific War in living history, so it's still a very hot topic. When Zach introduced us to this, I went backwards and I reread Guadalcanal Diary. I hadn't read it in 30 years. I reread Guadalcanal Diary. And then I picked up Eric Hamel's Pictorial History of Guadalcanal. Of course, like that's what you do, right? You got to have an Eric Hamel when you're studying a battle.
Oh, absolutely. I have a great Eric Hamill story for you too. He was a
Perfect.
dear, dear friend.
So then I started your book, and I think I read 70, 80, 90 pages before I think I even blinked. And I got to a part that I'd read in several books, and it was like, okay, I got to find it. So you talked about the lack of support, the lack of supplies. The Navy leaves them. They've got no food. Their unit of fire is about running out. No armors. They're hand pumping avgas. It's the worst nightmare you could think of. And the intelligence aspect. And something you mentioned, I think we've all read it in at least one book, that the only maps that anybody had of Guadalcanal at the time was from some old National Geographic magazine. Well, thank you, Mr. Bruning, for pointing that out because it didn't take me long.
He got
Oh my gosh.
So, for our listeners, if you've read a book, and you better read John Bruning's books, but if you've read a book where you've come across a line that says the guys at Guadalcanal had no intelligence, the only maps they had were some old National Geographics they found on the ship, it's the March of 1934 issue. And it's the very first article, Coconuts and Coral Islands by H. Ian Hogben. It's about 25 illustrations, pictures from the author, hand-drawn maps. This is not what the military considers intelligence, guys. I just want to let you know this is not how the military operates. But in the summer of 1942, this is how they operated. And at a time when, boy, did we need a win. I know we were probably riding a bit of a high at Midway, but let's face it, and you touched on it, the issues, the scandals with Brewster and some of our big aircraft firms, some of the people that were just out to turn a buck, some of the people that were on strike at some of the defense factories, the racial issues we had in Detroit. People were striking, people were being killed during some of these riots. People were writing articles in early 1943 about how we lost over 16,000 killed in action in 1942, but we lost 22,000 factory workers to traffic accidents. You know, America's always been America, right? We can't get away.
Yeah.
We can't get away from that. We really can't. But to just really truly absorb the full story, the full measure of what it took, and like you said, man, boy, did they measure up.
They did. Jeff, I actually have a question for you. Uh, when you said the hardest part of your deployment was coming home, how so? Tell me about that, because it was the exact same way for me, and for a lot of these guys, it was as well. And it's a phenomenon I think anybody who's been to combat will understand, but most civilians here at home don't get it all.
Combat's easy. Combat's easy. I served for the best military for the best country on planet Earth. I knew everything I needed to do. And if you get snuffed out, What a better way to go. There's no better way to go. Um, Living with it the rest of your life is tough. And I'll leave you with this. My platoon, we lost more guys to suicide than we did killed in action. So it's hard coming home.
Yeah, no, I'm really sorry to hear that. Um, yeah, for me, it was the same way. It was combat was incredibly simple. I didn't have to think. All I needed to do was grab my camera, my notebook, get on the helicopter, and go wherever we were going that day to whatever village or whatever we were doing. Um, Food was provided. I didn't have to worry about money. I didn't have bills. I didn't have to worry about taxes. You learn more about your home front than you ever want to know. And that's something that these guys on Guadalcanal discovered in horrible ways. I mean, the whole Dear John letter is a trope these days, but that was a major morale killer. Mail was a double-edged sword. You could get letters that would sustain you and keep you going, or you could get letters that would tear your heart out. And who really did a great job with that is Leon Uris in Battle Cry, where you see one of the Marines in the Sixth Marines early in that book when they're on Guadalcanal. He gets a Dear John letter and he just punches out. And he ends up being the guy who stays behind during a counterattack, I think, and ends up essentially sacrificing himself because he didn't want to live anymore. And it was all because of what happened at home. And over again, you see that as a theme as these guys cycle through combat and come home, cycle through combat and come home. And there's, the growing disconnect between the families and their warriors is devastating. So, it always kind of grinds me when I hear speeches given during Memorial Day when they talk about the sacrifices that the soldiers have made and our warriors have made. It isn't just the ones who were killed in action. Everybody who comes home has sacrificed in some way. They've given a part of themselves. There's a book, I think it's on war, is what it's called, that talks about the soul lost moment. And you can see in 53 days where these kids who are, just months removed from dances and dance halls stateside, their fraternity parties at their colleges, all of a sudden they're dealing with really intense moments where their friends are being burned in the cockpits and other friends are being killed in bombing attacks or naval gunfire, and they're worried that the Japanese are going to break through the Raider battalion and split the entire perimeter in two, and they were right in the way of all of that. So they weren't sure if they were going to be fighting tent to tent with their 45s that night in September of 1942. And so you go through something like that, and it transforms you, it changes you. And some guys stay on an even keel, like Mary Carl, and some guys like John L. Smith, who came to love his guys and made a crucial personal error, but it was the right decision for his squadron, to run the squadron with an iron fist for sure. He was definitely a disciplinarian, but he ran it with an informality that blended his relationship with the lower ranks, let's put it that way, to the point where he got to know these guys. And I think he realized early on that he could not treat these Marines the way Marines were usually treated, with a real stratification of rank. They didn't have time to bond with that kind of structure in place. So, and although Dick Mangrum maintained that in 232 for sure, but in 223, they were very informal. They called each other by their squadron nicknames. They were very much friends among themselves. And John L., when they started dying, these college kids turned Marines, tore his heart out, and he never really recovered from that. And his story and what happens to him over the course of the next 20 years of his career is just heartbreaking. And the fact that he was a Medal of Honor recipient and he endured this without any of the support and help that is available today is just tragic to me, and it's emblematic of what happened to that generation, really.
Yeah, I was
Dennis.
yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I had famously, for any of our listeners, I have some severe battles with the darkness that I called my dark passenger. And that was all from not combat. I didn't see any combat or anything, but I was always level 1 trauma center emergency and gunshot stabbings here down in the San Antonio. So we got all the border crossing stuff and the human trafficking and torture and kidnapping and, all kinds of stuff. And, I'm alive today because I had those resources. And so anybody's story about coming home, and especially the officer you're talking about, that hit me hard when I was out there on the ranch. And it kind of reminded me of that fictional character from Full Metal Jacket, Animal, where they're talking about break glass in case of emergency. Well, what do you do with that guy when you're done? And that's where the country failed. These guys was they had saved us, and we failed them, and I'm so glad that you put their story in an epilogue and at the end of what happened, because that's also extremely relevant and important. And I think that serves almost as a tempering gauge, that we make sure it's a constant reminder that you always have to make sure that you're not falling back on the old ways we were doing things before, but we need to keep these guys safe and gals safe that are dealing with this stuff. And all of our frontline people, including first responders, and I have a bunch of friends that killed themselves and took their own lives as well, that were, ER docs and ER nurses and medics and firefighters, friends. So, it's a very important that I'm so glad that you touched on that. And I got to say that my journey on this story was very unique, because here's 2 recommendations I have for everybody about your book, John. I think everybody needs to buy a copy, all right, and somehow try and get it signed, and then put it on a shelf. And then what they need to do is they need to come down to South Central Texas in August, and they need to go out in the woods and listen to it on audiobook, and they need to chainsaw all day in 95% humidity, because my experience through these guys, I'm just sweating.
Yeah. In June, while the mosquitoes are still bad.
I got mosquitoes, I got flies, and I got stuff flying in my eyes, and I'm just chainsawing through all this stuff and working, and there's fire ants and scorpions, and you're talking about Guadalcanal's got snakes and scorpions and fire ants, and I'm like, they're everywhere. I'm like having PTSD right there, like I was there, and but what's really unique, John, and I want you to take this with you for the rest of your life, whenever you think about if your book matters. I had a really unique experience, because at the various things that were happening, for instance, the Marine who sat in the cockpit and gunned down that Japanese guy that was trying to get to the aircraft and then just casually walks off. I know exactly where I was at on the ranch that day when I was dumping. I had the ATV and I was dumping the wood where it's going to be burned. And I remember that story came up, and I was sliding out of the seat, and I looked up at the sky, and there was a buzzard flying over, and I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
this is. And then there's an officer, a pilot who was a non-com before, and then made it into being, we all know his name. I don't want to ruin it for everybody. And uh, when he's gone, uh, man, I had to take a seat. I had to take a knee. That was powerful. Yeah, that was powerful. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate, and of course, as a writer myself, and I have so many questions about your writings, how you keep track of the characters, like, and how do you, I know how I do, but when you have all these guys and you got to, your continuity and your flow and your everything's got to agree in time and place. And I don't even know if we have time for that, Jeff, but you know,
It's full immersion for me. Usually when I'm writing, I go up to a little cabin in the woods in the Cascades, a few miles from a lake, into this cabin that I've probably written parts or all of the last 14 books. Um, and I will spend weeks and weeks up there with just the cat, my dog, and the guys. And I live the story
mm,
for sure. And one thing, definitely the darkness that engulfs some of these guys is a major theme of the book, especially the aftermath. But the reason why I started the book the way I did was because in that moment in New York, when the guys are on the hero tour, the first heroes back from the Marine Corps. This is after the Marines, the Marine aviators were crushed at Pearl Harbor. They were crushed at Wake Island. They were crushed at Midway. The Marine aviation was 0-3 against the Japanese going into Guadalcanal, and the Midway veterans that were seeded into the two squadrons were very, very dark and bitter, and their morale for the most part was not good. But one of them, Marion Carl, was a very even keeled kind of guy. And you see him at the beginning of the book have this moment with a woman he meets in New York City. And bam, he falls in love. And you find out later in the book that they have a whirlwind 2-week romance and they get married, right? And the point I wanted to make with that was something that you'll see as a theme through all my other books. And I know this is going to sound kind of, I don't know, harlequin-y, but the transformative aspect of combat can be mitigated with love. And over again, you see that within this book, which is the story of a father's love and for his kids and his wife in combat in Race of Aces. You see it with the relationship between the aces and their wives, especially Gerald Johnson and his wife Barbara. The Trident, which I wrote with Jay Redman, was the story of how one Navy SEAL couple made it work when 95% of the SEALs get divorced. So over and over and over again, I've tried to wrap these stories into something that tells a bigger human aspect to all this, which is how love can balance the darkness, for sure.
I'm so glad you said that. And I'm sure Jeff's going to be able to interject on that as well. But my better half, she would say, I don't know, well, I'm not this or I'm not that. And I just looked at her deep in her soul and I said, but do you know the peace that you bring to my heart? You can't buy that. You can't buy that at a jewelry store. Nope. You can't lose that enough weight for that. You can't purchase a dress for that. That is you. That is your heart. That's who you are. That's what I see. And the peace that you bring me, I will fight to the death for that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. And I'm so glad that you have that, because it's been my experience, the people I know who served and came back and didn't have that or had chaos in that aspect of their life had a much harder time. sure.
Well, John, while
So,
we're on this topic, I think that that's a good segue of everything that we've been talking about. I'd like to kind of, if I can, since we're getting near the end anyway, I'd like to kind of, I think it's appropriate to end the podcast the way that you end your books, and if you would, I'd like you to please tell our audience about Taylor Marks and the impact that Taylor has had on your writing.
so Taylor, okay. I was teaching ballroom dance in a high school class, PE class. I was teaching a ballroom dance section as a favor for a friend, and this was back in 2007. And Taylor Marks was one of my then wife's students, and he was in the class, and he was all enthusiasm and energy, and he was willing to try new stuff, and he was always up for the moment. And a lot of the males in the class just they were too cool for school, and they didn't want to try, and their girlfriends were all upset with them. But Taylor was all in. And I'm like, this is a kid I'm gonna pull into my Op4 group. And I had after I wrote The Devil's Sandbox, I created one of the reasons why I ended up with an ex-wife was I used the money that was put aside for a down payment on a hobby farm to fund this organization called the 973rd Civilians on the Battlefield. And basically, we were bad guys for the Oregon National Guard infantry units. We later branched out, worked with Homeland Security, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I pulled Taylor into the group, and he turned out to be one of the best members of the group we ever had. And he became very, very close to me and my family. He watched the kids when we went on date nights. And ultimately, he told me instead of going to college, he wanted to go join the Oregon National Guard and serve with the units that we were supporting. And I told him to go read House to House in the Devil's Sandbox and come back. And he did, and he still wanted to. I gave him my Pontiac GTO to take his girl to prom, along with his best friend. They double dated. And a year after the prom at the same venue, I gave his eulogy. And he had been killed in Iraq 6 weeks into his deployment by an Iranian EFP on a bridge in front of an Iraqi police unit that was working with the Shia militias. And as a result, I close almost every book that I've written with a paragraph or two about Taylor, and 53 Days was no exception. I drive that GTO across the country every time I do research for these books. Because I feel close to him. I can feel his presence in the car.
Mm.
And yeah, like we're talking 16 years later, and the anniversary was just on the 28th. And you never heal from those things. You just have to grow around the pain. Now you can see how it affects me even now.
Mm.
But he was one of those kids who had enormous potential, and it got cut short, and the country is less for it. And we have a lot of people like that, especially from the greatest generation. So this is one of the other reasons why I do what I do. Thank you for letting me talk about Taylor.
Oh, of course. And I think Jeff said it earlier, but this book in particular, I lost count of the number of times that it brought me to tears because it was that good. And every single time I get to the last chapters of your book and you talk about Taylor, that does it too. So thank you for making sure his name gets mentioned too.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, I appreciate that. I do what I can. We escorted his remains home in the GTO when he came into Salem Airport, and he was here in Independence for a couple of like a night and a morning, I think, and then we escorted him up to Willamette National, where he was laid to rest up in the Portland area. So the GTO will be in the family until I die.
Wow.
Well, John, as a living history reenactor, as well as some of my other hobbies, we have a saying when we go to air shows or perform at different events around Texas. And it's really quite simple. It's just a simple line that I came up with years ago, and it's we do what we do because they did what they did. And we thank you for doing what you do because you do it so well.
Mhm.
This has been a fantastic episode. We are so appreciative of your time, sharing your talents with us, and this is definitely not the last time that we'll be talking with you. We will definitely be staying in touch. Of course, if you're ever in this area, I would love to shake your hand and just spend an afternoon, really just getting to know you. And I know the other guys here would feel the same. So speaking of getting to know you, how can people reach out? How can they find you? Social media, all the things.
My website is theamericanwarrior.com. Uh,
Mm,
I'm
awesome.
on Facebook as John R. Bruning, and you can find me on Instagram at John R. Bruning, and also John R. Bruning on Twitter, which is X now, I guess. And then, of course, Sylvie has her own page on Instagram. She has more followers than I do, so I'm bitter about that. But it's so funny because every time I put her in a photo with the books, they get like 4 times the traffic, when I'm running little ads on Instagram. So the cat more than earns her keep, and I know she's a pain when she jumps up here, but she's yeah. So she's at Sylvie the Canine Cat on Instagram.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, we invite
Everybody,
all of
yeah,
our
for sure.
WTSP listeners to go ahead and check you out. Dennis, you got one more final thought?
Yes, one more final thought. I just want to thank you for, you know, what you do, and you do well. And I while we were talking, I ordered the book, the Sandbox.
oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
I ordered that, and then
Thank you,
and
Tom.
Jeff, I ordered the National Geographic. I found it on eBay,
Right on.
so that's coming as well.
It,
Um,
perfect.
Thanks a lot, fellas. And
Yeah,
Thank you,
well, we
guys.
invite all of our listeners. Make sure you check us out at WTSPWWII.com. That's WTSPWorldWar2.com. Check out all of our latest merchandise, our episodes, which will be coming out. And Zach, our amazing producer, is going to make sure that you guys can find your way to John R. Bruning and his amazing books, the story of love, of loss, of sacrifice, of war, of the human experience, how men could save a country, but sometimes a country cannot save the men. Thank you again, Mr. Bruning, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you, Chance.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This is a really special evening. I really appreciate you having me on.
And John, just so you know, and I swear I've been telling people this. This book is so good. I've been telling people. I know this is a bold statement, but George R. R. Martin could drop The Winds of Winter tomorrow, and I would still say, shelf it, put it down, and read this first. And I mean
Thank
that
you.
from a Song and Ice and Fire fan. Like I would, this is one of the best of all time.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I really
John,
appreciate
do you
that.
ever make it down to San Antonio way? Because I know Jeff and I would definitely, or Austin, anything like that.
I will be going through Austin probably this upcoming spring. So I will definitely let you guys know. But if you're ever in Oregon, um, I now have a place. When my wife and I split, I ended up in a little like mother-in-law's quarters, 150
Mhm.
feet from the house to be close to the kids, so they never
Sure.
lost their sense of family. I still cooked for the family for 8 years after I got back from Afghanistan. But I was basically living in a dorm room. And
Mm.
I finally just said, you know what, enough's enough. The kids are through college. It's time for me to live my own life. So I actually have a place where we can sit and have a beer and hang out in my hangar. I have a taxiway behind me. I don't have an airplane, but maybe someday if I write another bestseller. Um,
That's awesome.
but yeah, and my office is in an old Air Defense Command Center from the Cold War, so I put a bar in
Wow,
it so we can
that's
sit and
cool.
do shots in the control room that looks like something straight out of War Games or Doctor Strangelove.
That's awesome.
And do us a favor, John. Tell your daughter Renee we all said hi, because I know she helps with your research, and I wish we could have talked about that too. But we'll talk about that next time.
Sounds good. Yeah, she has gone full mad scientist and is a laboratory medical scientist now.
Oh, wow. Good for her.
Yeah, I get to hear all about diseases and plagues and crazy. Dinner conversations are lit, I'll tell you.
I am super stoked about your book you mentioned, the Philippines, the gorillas, and
Me too.
wow.
It's like there's cannibalism, there's mass executions, there's a U.S. Army officer going insane, and another one saving the day. I mean, it's just a crazy story.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dennis, speaking of crazy stories, I know I touched on Indestructible, but if you like Philippines, like prior to us coming back there, like post Pearl Harbor attack, Indestructible is about the guy that his family gets left behind in the Philippines, and he's got this crazy pilot has got to go try to save him and makes multiple attempts, and it's incredible. Like, I didn't know Pappy Gunn was real. I can't believe that we don't know his name. That's not like a household name. You know what I mean? He did so much, and it's such a crazy story. So that's definitely worth checking out too.
Awesome.
Thank
Super
you.
stoked.
All right.
Thank you very
Guys,
much.
thank you for
I
everything,
appreciate
and
you.
thank you for your services. Wow. Just listening to your own stories, I really want to just sit down over a beer with you guys. For sure.
Absolutely.
We'll make it happen, sir.
We'll make it
definitely.
happen.
Thank you.
We got to get
I'll
our book
definitely
signed.
reach out through Instagram. I'm an Instagram guy. I'll reach out to you for sure, sir. And yeah, we look forward to having you back on. A lot of our guests, especially authors, there's always there's always a spot to come on and promote a new book or talk about an old one. So anytime, please, feel free to reach out. I'd love to have you back on, because this is not over. This is not over.
Yeah,
This
for
is
sure.
not
Jeff.
the end.
Oh,
for
not by a
sure.
long shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be a great honor to come back.
This has been a Digital 410 production.